My wife, the CEO, left me stranded at the awards ceremony, publicly mocking my little startup during her speech. Even my cat earns more than him. 10 minutes later, I stepped on stage to accept a bigger award. The look on her face when she read my name. Even my cat makes more than him, Clarice said, smirking, looking out at the laughing crowd. I was in the balcony section, hands clenched. The moment hit me like a slap. 10 minutes later, the host called my name. Her smirk froze in place as I walked on stage to accept an award she hadn't even known I was nominated for. Now she's trying to apologize, but how do you go back from that? I don't usually post here, and I'm not looking for sympathy as much as I'm just trying to understand what the heck happened to my marriage. My name is Bennett. I'm 43 years old and live in Seattle. I've been married to my wife, Clarice, for the last 10 years. No kids, just us and her obnoxiously pampered cat, Duke. She's a CEO of a major e-commerce company, and I run a small ethical tech startup that's been my passion for the last 3 years. Clarice has always been a big personality. She commands every room she walks into. I used to admire it. Heck, I fell in love with her partly because of it. She was sharp, driven, the kind of woman who could talk a boardroom into handing over a blank check. But lately, that charm has felt more like a blade. 3 years ago, I left a well-paying job to start my own company, Obelisk Labs. I had savings, a vision, and a couple of brilliant friends who believed in the mission. We wanted to build software that focused on transparent data use, giving power back to everyday users and nonprofits. It wasn't flashy, and it wasn't fast money. But I believed in it. Clarice said she supported me at first. Said she respected the guts it took to chase something real. But that support, it started fading. Slowly. Like someone dimming a light without realizing they're doing it. It started with little things. At parties, she'd laugh and say things like, "He's the idealist in the relationship. I handle the spreadsheets." People would chuckle. I did too. At first. Then it turned into jabs about how working in your pajamas all day must be nice. Or calling my team the three amigos in a garage. I'd raise an eyebrow, and she'd say she was just joking. The joke started to sting. Still, I let it slide. I loved her. And I believed that once the business gained traction, she'd see it differently. Fast forward to a couple months ago, Clarice gets nominated for a major tech industry award, 3 categories, actually. The ceremony is a big deal in Seattle. I didn't tell her I was also nominated for an award in a smaller, but rapidly growing, ethics in tech category. I wasn't trying to be secretive, I just didn't want to make it about me. She had a speech to prepare, a table full of investors to impress. She was under a lot of pressure. The night of the event, we rode together to the venue, Paramount Theater. She's in this emerald green dress that probably cost more than my laptop. I'm in my rented tux. I'd thought, maybe foolishly, that we'd be sitting together. But she handed me a balcony pass. Executives only at my table. "You understand, right?" she said, reapplying lipstick in the car mirror. I nodded. I didn't want to make a scene. But I felt the sting. We were married. This was our life together. And yet more and more, I felt like an accessory in hers. I sat alone in the upper section of the theater, watching her glide through the crowd downstairs, shaking hands, air-kissing. She looked like she belonged there. I felt like I was crashing my own marriage. Then came her speech. She took the stage with her usual elegance, smiling wide, thanking her team, her mentors. She had the room eating out of her hand. Then she said it. I remember when my husband decided to leave his job to start his own thing. He said he wanted to change the world. She chuckled. Meanwhile, even my cat has earned more royalties this year than he has. Laughter erupted across the room. Not just polite laughter. Real, rolling laughter. People leaned into each other. Someone near me actually muttered, "Of. Harsh." I sat there, frozen. I could barely breathe. It was like someone reached into my chest and squeezed. She kept talking. About disruption, innovation, whatever. I didn't hear the rest. 10 minutes later, I heard my name. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then the spotlight shifted, and people turned toward the upper level. I stood, slowly, heart pounding, and made my way down the side staircase. As I stepped onto the stage, I saw her face. Clarice was standing by the curtains, wine glass in hand, her eyes wide. I've never seen her look so stunned. The host handed me the award and the mic. I kept the speech short. I want to thank my team at Obelisk Labs. We believed there was a better way to do tech. A way that didn't exploit people. And we were told that wasn't profitable. But here we are. This one's for every quiet builder who's been laughed at, underestimated, or left behind. I handed the mic back and walked off stage without looking at her again. She followed me into the lobby later, heels tapping quickly behind me. I didn't know, she said. You never asked, I replied, not even turning around. You could have told me you were nominated. I would have said something. I turned then. Like what? My husband's a charity case, but hey, give him a hand? That's not fair, she snapped. You're blowing this out of proportion. I just looked at her. I think that was the worst part. The complete lack of remorse in her eyes. Just inconvenience. We didn't ride home together. She went to the after party with her investors. I walked 2 blocks and got a lift. Since then, she's tried to act like nothing happened. Says she was joking, that it was harmless, that I'm too sensitive. But something broke in me that night. She used to be my biggest supporter. My partner. But somewhere along the way, I became her punchline. I haven't told anyone in our circle. I haven't talked to my family about it either. But I can't shake the feeling that this moment, was a turning point. Not just in my career. But in my marriage. She keeps saying we can work through it. But can we? I didn't respond to her texts the next day. I couldn't. I needed space to just feel what I was feeling without having to justify it to her or anyone. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't angry. I was just tired. Tired of the imbalance. Tired of smiling through gritted teeth. Tired of having my life edited into a footnote in hers. The morning after the ceremony, I woke up alone in the guest room. I slept there after getting home late. She wasn't even home yet. When I came downstairs, she was in the kitchen, dressed like she hadn't gone to bed at all. Same dress from the night before. Her makeup smudged. She looked like someone had drained all the life out of her. I didn't say anything. Just went straight for the coffee. Can we talk? She asked, her voice hoarse. I don't know, I said. I don't think there's anything left to say. She followed me into the dining room and sat across from me. I didn't sit. I leaned against the counter, mug in hand, trying to keep my hands from shaking. It was supposed to be a joke, she said. Yeah, I replied. And it worked. They all laughed. She looked down at her hands. I didn't think it would hit you that hard. That's the problem, Clarice, I said, my voice lower than I expected. You didn't think about me at all. We didn't yell. We didn't throw anything. There were no dramatic monologues or ultimatums. Just silence. The kind that grows between 2 people who used to speak the same language but now don't even share the same alphabet. That day I went into the office, a shared space I rent with 2 other small teams. My guys were already there, buzzing about the win. They had watched the live stream. They cheered when I came in. Hugs, back slaps, plans to celebrate. I tried to match their energy, but I felt hollow. My phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the day. Clarice. Then her assistant. Then her again. I didn't answer. Later that week, I found out through a colleague that Clarice's speech was making the rounds on tech gossip blogs. Some found it funny. Others, not so much. A few writers picked up the awkward contrast between her joke and my award that followed. One headline read, "From punchline to podium, the husband she laughed at just won bigger." I never shared the article. But I saw that she did. Without comment. No apology, no defense. Just the link. Like she wanted to be on the right side of the story now that it was making waves. And that's when it hit me, Clarice wasn't sorry because she hurt me. She was sorry because it looked bad. She called again that night. I picked it up this time. "Are you planning on just avoiding me forever?" she asked. "No," I said. "I'm thinking." "About what?" "About whether I want to keep doing this with someone who thinks I'm a prop in their performance." She didn't reply. I could hear her breathing on the line, steady and cold. Then, a flat, "So what, you're just going to throw everything away over one joke?" "One joke?" I repeated, almost laughing. "Clarice, it wasn't one joke. It's been 3 years of jokes. 3 years of playful digs and harmless comments. That speech was just the part where everyone else got to see what I've been hearing for years." More silence. "You're being dramatic," she said eventually. And that was it. That phrase, that one condescending dismissal, did more damage than the speech ever could. It was like she was doubling down, as if my pain was just another inconvenience she had to manage. I hung up. I didn't go home that night. Stayed at a friend's place in Fremont. I didn't say much to him, just that things were rough. He didn't press. Just tossed me a pillow and a blanket and said I could crash on the couch as long as I needed. In the following days, I threw myself into work. Obelisk had suddenly gained traction. Our website saw a 300% spike in traffic after the award. Journalists reached out. Podcasts invited me to speak. I should have been elated, but all I could think about was how the person I wanted to share it with the most had become the one who most resented my success. A week passed. Then 2. Clarice didn't call. Didn't text. Nothing. I went home one night to grab some clothes and found Duke sitting by the door, waiting. She wasn't there. I stood in our bedroom, stared at the closet, and realized more than half her stuff was gone. No note. No explanation. Just, gone. I opened a drawer and found her wedding ring. She'd left it behind on a folded piece of notebook paper. One line, written in her sharp handwriting, "Maybe this is what you needed to finally win." I stared at the words for a long time. I don't know what she meant, whether it was sarcasm, bitterness, or a weird kind of blessing. But whatever it was, it closed something inside me. I stayed in that house, alone, for the next few weeks. Duke adjusted surprisingly well. He seemed relieved, honestly. Like the tension he'd picked up on for months had finally lifted. And me? I started to sleep better. But every now and then, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and wonder how two people who once promised to lift each other up ended up becoming each other's worst audience. Clarice hasn't reached out again. Not directly, at least. I've heard from mutual friends that she's been spinning the story, saying I overreacted, that I embarrassed her in public, that I made her look bad on purpose. Let her. I'm not here to win the narrative. I just want peace. And maybe, someday, I'll figure out how to build that again, this time with someone who doesn't see me as a prop. The weeks kept rolling by, slow but strangely full. It was like time had paused for Clarice and me, but the rest of the world was speeding up. Obelisk was growing faster than we had anticipated. One of our tools, a data transparency API for nonprofits, had gone viral after a major political podcast mentioned it. I was suddenly taking meetings with people I used to cold email and never hear back from. And yet, I felt numb through most of it. I kept waiting for it to hit me. The pride. The joy. The sense of validation. I thought after years of struggling, of pouring everything into something I believed in, I'd feel like I had finally arrived. But the thing no one tells you about achieving success after being treated like you'd never make it, is that it feels empty when the person you love the most isn't there to see it, and not because life pulled you apart, but because they chose not to believe in you. I started seeing a therapist. Something I probably should have done years ago, honestly. Her name's Maya. She's direct in a way I wasn't ready for at first, but that I've come to appreciate. During our second session, I finally said it out loud. I think my wife resents me for being happy doing something that didn't revolve around money or prestige. Maya didn't respond right away. She just nodded slightly and waited. It made me sit in my own words longer than I was comfortable with. She never said it directly, I added, but the more success she had, the more I felt like I was shrinking in her eyes. Like she couldn't understand why I wasn't chasing the same thing she was. Did you ever talk to her about it? She asked. I tried, I said. A few times. But every time, it turned into her making me feel like I was being too emotional or insecure. She dismissed your feelings, Maya said, confirming it like a fact, not a question. I nodded. She didn't have to say it directly. She said it in the way she looked at me. The way she laughed when people made comments about her being the breadwinner. The way she told our friends I was still figuring it out like I was some teenager. Maya tilted her head. Do you think she ever respected your work? Even in the beginning? That question sat heavy in my gut. I used to think she did. But now I wasn't sure. Maybe she liked the idea of me chasing a dream, until that dream became inconvenient to her narrative. Until it made her uncomfortable that I wasn't playing by the same rules. Until it started working. I hadn't told many people what had gone down at the awards ceremony. Our friends had seen the speech, sure, but unless you knew me, you wouldn't necessarily connect the dots. But people started asking questions as my company gained traction and Clarice's speech continued floating around tech Twitter. Some asked me privately if we were okay. I didn't lie. But I didn't overshare either. We're taking space, I'd say. Or, things are complicated. The truth is, Clarice and I had been drifting long before the award show. The public jab just crystallized what I'd been trying to ignore for years. About a month after the ceremony, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email. An actual letter, in her handwriting. It was short. Only a few lines. I said things I shouldn't have. I got caught up in the moment. I didn't realize how far gone we were until I saw your face that night. You deserved better from me. I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. But I do wish you well. Always. There was no return address. I didn't cry reading it. I thought I would. But I just sat there with it in my hands, like I was holding an old version of her. One that no longer existed. She had finally acknowledged what she'd done. But it came too late. That same week, I moved into a new apartment overlooking Lake Union. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, enough for me and Duke. I finally admitted to myself that the house had started to feel like a museum, one curated with pieces of a life I wasn't living anymore. I didn't make any dramatic declarations. No big social media updates or friend group announcements. I just quietly moved forward. Duke adapted quickly. He started sleeping at the foot of my bed, following me from room to room like some disinterested roommate. Funny how quickly a cat can become your closest companion when the world feels upside down. One night, about 6 weeks after the gala, I ran into one of Clarice's colleagues, Renee, at a local networking mixer. I almost didn't go. I still hated events. But my business partner insisted, and I owed him one. Renee was surprised to see me. She gave a warm smile but looked unsure, like she didn't know whether to bring Clarice up or pretend nothing had happened. She didn't need to. Clarice has been quieter since that night, she said gently, once we chatted a bit. I don't know what happened between you two, but it shook her. I didn't respond right away. I just took a sip of my drink and stared past her at the skyline. She made a choice, I said finally. And I made mine. Renee didn't press. She just nodded, and we moved on to other topics. That conversation lingered in my head though, not because of what she said, but because I didn't feel anger anymore. No bitterness. Just a strange kind of peace. I was building something real. With people who respected me. With a team that was making something good in the world. I was waking up each morning feeling aligned. Not happy, necessarily, but like I was at least on the right path. Clarice was no longer part of that path. And for the first time since this all started, that felt okay. The following few months felt like a slow exhale after years of holding my breath. The initial high of the award and the flood of attention that came with it gradually gave way to a steadier rhythm: meetings, product updates, hiring, investor calls. The kind of momentum I used to dream about when it was just me, 2 friends, and a rented co-working space. Obelisk was finally more than just an idea. It was becoming something real, something that could stand on its own. But in those quiet moments, the long walks back from the office, the nights sitting alone in my kitchen with a glass of wine and Duke asleep on the chair next to me, I still found myself looking backward. Not out of longing, but out of curiosity. Like trying to make sense of a story after you've already turned the last page. Clarice and I didn't speak again for a long while. I didn't block her, but I muted her across all platforms. I didn't want to see curated snapshots of her life, of her smiling at some conference, flanked by people who still whispered about the speech behind closed doors. I didn't want to wonder who she was with, or whether she ever told the truth about what happened between us. I didn't want to give any more of my time to a version of her that never saw me clearly. It was around the end of summer that I started to feel better. Not all at once. There was no big realization or movie moment. But one day I was having coffee with my sister, Meredith, and she stopped mid-sentence and said, "You look different." I laughed. Older? No, she said, studying me. Lighter. I didn't know what to say to that. But later that night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and realized she was right. Something had shifted. I looked tired, sure, startup life was no vacation, but I didn't look weighed down. I didn't look like I was constantly preparing for the next hit. Part of that healing came from finally sharing the full story with someone who would listen. I told Meredith everything one weekend when we took a drive up to Bellingham. I hadn't meant to, just needed some time away from the city, and she suggested we do a sibling road trip like when we were kids. But once we hit the quiet stretch of highway past Everett, it all came out. The jokes, the party snubs, the speech, the way Clarice made me feel like my dreams were an inconvenience. Meredith didn't interrupt. She just drove, one hand on the wheel, occasionally nodding or making those small sounds people make when they're listening with their full attention. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she said, "You were always too humble for your own good. I think you stayed quiet because you hoped she'd eventually see your worth without you having to prove it. And when she didn't, it broke something." That hit me hard. I realized she was right. I had spent years believing that if I just kept building, kept showing up, kept loving Clarice through the condescension, she'd come around. That she'd stop seeing me as the underdog and finally see me as her equal again. But love, as it turns out, can't survive when one person is always shrinking to fit inside the other's spotlight. On the way back to Seattle, Meredith asked me if I thought Clarice had ever really loved me. It was a heavy question. One I'd asked myself 1,000 times, in different forms. Did she love me, or did she love the version of me that played well in her narrative? Did she love who I was, or who I made her feel like she was? I think she did, I said after a long pause. But I don't think she ever respected me. Not really. Meredith nodded again, her jaw tight. That's not love, Benny. That's control with lipstick on it. She wasn't wrong. I spent the following weeks leaning harder into my work, but not to escape. This time, it felt like I was actually living in the thing I'd built, instead of trying to use it to prove my worth to someone else. We signed 2 new contracts, onboarded a handful of new employees, and started talking to a nonprofit coalition in the Midwest that wanted to adopt our software statewide. I hired an office manager. Got a proper accountant. Set regular hours. The startup finally felt like a business instead of a glorified experiment. And then, out of nowhere, I saw her again. It was October. I'd gone to a small networking dinner organized by a local business incubator, very low-key, just 15 or so people around a long table at a restaurant in Capitol Hill. I almost didn't go. But my friend Ben insisted, and I hadn't had a decent meal in weeks. About halfway through the night, I saw her come through the door. Clarice. She looked exactly the same. Not in a "she hasn't changed" kind of way, but in a way that made me realize how perfectly composed she always was. Same posture. Same knowing smile. Same confidence, like it was stitched into her skin. She caught my eye across the table. Her smile flickered, then settled back in place. She sat 2 seats down from me. We didn't speak for most of the evening. I made small talk with the woman next to me, a startup founder from Portland, and pretended not to notice every time Clarice glanced my way. When the check came and people started wrapping up, she stepped over to me. "Hey," she said. I looked at her, waiting. "You look good," she added. "So do you," I said, politely. We stood in silence for a beat too long. "How've you been?" she asked, as if she hadn't watched my face crack open on stage in front of 400 people just a few months earlier. "Busy," I said. "Obelisk is growing." "I've seen," she replied, almost quietly. "You've done really well." I nodded, not smiling. I didn't feel bitterness. But I also didn't feel the pull I thought I would. There was a time when I would have savored her approval. Now, it just felt like an echo. "I meant what I wrote," she said after a pause. "In the letter." "I know," I said. "Thank you for that." More silence. Then she said, "I don't expect anything. I just wanted to say it in person." I nodded again. "I appreciate it." We left it there. No long talk. No attempt at reconciliation. No apology dance. Just 2 people who had shared a decade, now standing on opposite shores of something neither of us had the tools to fix. I walked out into the Seattle night air, buttoned my coat, and started the walk back to my car. There were no fireworks. No tears. Just a strange, cold peace. And maybe that was enough, for now. It wasn't long after that run-in with Clarice that everything started to fall into place, not just in my career, but internally, too. I wasn't searching for revenge. I wasn't even consciously hoping she'd regret what she'd done. I had let go, I really had. But sometimes, life just ties the bow for you. 3 months later, Obelisk got picked up for a national pilot program with a coalition of public interest tech organizations. It was a huge deal. The kind of project that would put us on the map for years to come: stable funding, scalable infrastructure, and most importantly, real-world impact. We threw a small celebration at our new office space in South Lake Union: pizza, some drinks, nothing flashy. Just the team, a few of our earliest partners, and a quiet sense of satisfaction humming under the surface. A week after that, I was invited to speak at a data ethics summit in Chicago. Not flashy like the Tech Awards Gala, but serious people, policy experts, researchers, journalists. I gave a 30-minute talk on how transparency in data use isn't a dream, but a responsibility. I even got a standing ovation. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole. Like I was doing exactly what I was meant to. And then the emails started coming in. First, a message from a recruiter at one of the big consulting firms Clarice used to partner with. They wanted to explore a long-term advisory role with me. Then a meeting request from a think tank she'd once tried to court and been rejected by. They were now citing my research in their reports. But the moment that really sealed it? Clarice reached out again. Not a long letter this time. Just a brief email. No subject line. The body said, "Do you have a few minutes to talk? It's business related. I think it could benefit both of us." At first, I didn't plan to respond. But something in me said, no, answer this. You're not angry anymore. You're not trying to prove anything. And maybe this is the final stitch. We agreed to meet at a cafe downtown. Neutral territory. I wore a soft sweater and jeans. Comfortable. Confidence. Clarice showed up in a black blazer and heels, even the CEO. But I noticed something new in her demeanor. She wasn't performing. Not this time. Thanks for agreeing to meet, she said as we sat down. Of course, I replied. She slid a proposal across the table, literally printed. Old school, like something out of a Harvard case study. I want to license your transparency tools, she said. My company's under pressure. Regulatory stuff. You probably heard. I had. There'd been some rumblings about her company's questionable data collection practices. Nothing public yet, but enough to make her nervous. I read about it, I said, flipping the pages slowly. Looks like the industry's catching up. She nodded, not defensive, just resigned. We need help, she said. And your tools are the best fit. I think we can structure something where, I stopped her there. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I appreciate the interest, I said evenly. But we're not taking clients like yours right now. Her brows lifted slightly. Like mine? Companies that didn't take this seriously until it became a liability, I said. We're focusing on organizations that always cared. Schools. Clinics. Watchdog groups. No one is trying to clean the house after the smoke's already started. Clarice stared at me. Not angry. Just stunned. I see, she said finally. We both knew what that meant. She wasn't going to get what she wanted. Not from me. Not anymore. She stood, carefully folding the proposal and sliding it back into her bag. Well, she said, her tone unreadable. Congrats. You really did it. No, I said, meeting her gaze. We didn't. I did. And with that, I stood, gave a polite nod, and walked out of the cafe. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had built something real. Not just the company, but my life, my peace. I had climbed out from under her shadow without needing to destroy her to get there. That was the best part. Revenge wasn't some elaborate plan. It was standing tall in the full light of who I had become while she sat in the ruins of who she had pretended to be. And that, as it turns out, is the most satisfying ending I could have asked for.